Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional leagues, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I hope everybody's doing well today. We got a lot of interesting topics on slate, so stay tuned, and I'm sure you will enjoy. As always, I'm your host, Marcus Vargas. Now, let's get right into it. It seems like with every passing day, this Tom Brady free agency situation is sort of a roller coaster. You know, I don't think that anyone can really say for sure that he's actually leaving, no matter what we feel, and no one is sure exactly what team he's going to. Today, I want to start off by looking at an ESPN article that was written recently that details a few teams that are most likely going to make an offer for Tom Brady, and 6 teams that are actually likely to pass on him. Now, the reason I want to do this is a couple of the teams on this list, on either list, might surprise you because there are some betting favorites to land Brady that maybe will pass on him. So I want to take a look at that, and let's just get started with that. So the first team I want to look at, mostly because they were the betting favorites to land Tom Brady, is the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, you guys might be expecting them to be a team that is going to offer Brady something, but ESPN analysts predict that they're one of the teams that's actually going to pass on Tom Brady. Now, the article argues that Brady's going to give star power to the Raiders, with their move to Las Vegas. It all sort of makes sense, but when you look at it in more detail, it kind of doesn't. If you compare Tom Brady and Derek Carr's stats, I'll just read them here for you. So last year, Tom Brady, 60.8 completion percentage, 4,057 yards, 24 TDs, and 8 picks. Derek Carr, 4,054 yards, 21 touchdowns, and 8 picks. Derek Carr only had 3 less yards, 3 less touchdowns, and the same amount of picks. He also had 10% higher completion percentage. So it doesn't really make sense to give Derek Carr the boot for Tom Brady when Derek Carr just came off of a career year. Also, you'd basically just be getting the same player who's, 14 years older? So this move really actually doesn't make sense for the Raiders. I feel like what the Raiders would want to do instead is maybe draft some wide receiver talent for Derek Carr and build more around him. Also, we haven't heard any of the Raiders brass complain about Derek Carr. Actually, they've been pretty vocal in their support of him. John Gruden, we've seen him show love for Derek Carr, and they're saying that they love what he's done. Actually, I can read a quote here. "I love what Derek Carr did. Love what he brings to our team, and anxious to continue to build around him." Those are words from John Gruden. That doesn't sound like a team that's looking to sign a new quarterback, especially one that's 42 years old, because you're not going to be able to build around him very much unless you're planning to only build for 2 years and then, go into rebuild mode all over again. Now, if you look at what General Manager Mike Mayock said, he says, "We've already got a quarterback that runs John's offense at a very high level." Not as, supportive as John Gruden, but he's not saying, "Hey, we're looking to change things. We're looking to change things up, or looking for a new guy for our system." So this actually makes sense, and I'm actually, I'm glad to see this because I didn't think he would go to the Raiders at all, and so that falls in line with my opinion. All right, another team on the likely to pass list, the San Francisco 49ers. Now, the San Francisco 49ers weren't even on my list until, there were rumors and there was buzz about oh, what if the Patriots, they switch again and Belichick gets his guy back and Garoppolo and Tom Brady can go play in his hometown and, this, that, and the third. But again, when you look at this closely, it doesn't really make sense. Now, 49ers GM has actually made it pretty clear that Jimmy Garoppolo is probably still going to be the 49ers quarterback for years to come. He says, quote, "We're extremely proud of Jimmy and committed to Jimmy moving forward." He said that at the Combine, and that was very, very recently. Now, clearly, that doesn't sound like a GM who's looking to sign a 42-year-old who only wants, a 2-year contract and probably won't play past 44 or 45 years old. Jimmy Garoppolo is very young, and while he makes a lot of mistakes, he still has a ton of room to grow, and he's entering his prime. A fact that was also noted by John Lynch. He says the most exciting thing about Garoppolo is all of his room for growth. He hasn't come close to hitting his ceiling, and I think the room for growth, the more experience he gets in the system, the more experience he gets playing in general, we think the arrow's up, and that's a good thing. So, I mean, that's pretty much a solid endorsement for Jimmy Garoppolo, and it sort of squashes any of the rumors that they're looking to trade him for Tom Brady and lose Jimmy Garoppolo. The only thing I possibly could see, if anything, at the moment is they sign Tom Brady and keep Garoppolo, but who wants to pay $20+ million for a backup quarterback? Doesn't really make any sense, does it? So, let's take a look at there are 6 teams on this list, but I want to take a look at 3 because those 3 were really high potential landing spots for Tom Brady that are surprising that they're on the likely teams to pass. So let's look at this last one here, and it's one that I actually had as one of my favorites for Tom Brady, the Indianapolis Colts. So this one is a little less clear-cut than the others. It's not necessarily a personnel issue. It's not, we have a guy already that we trust or that we want to go forward with for sure, because we all know Jacoby Brissett struggled last year, and no one sees Jacoby as an elite guy. They see him as someone he can get the job done. He can provide clutch plays in big spots, but he's not the most consistent guy. He's not gonna take over a game himself. So the reason that these ESPN analysts have for the Colts passing on Brady is pretty interesting. Quote, "Signing Brady would significantly go against what general manager Chris Ballard has emphasized since the day he was hired in the winter of 2017. Ballard wants players still in the prime of their career or those who haven't yet reached their potential when it comes to signing outside free agents. Brady, a first-ballot Hall of Famer and arguably the greatest quarterback in NFL history, no longer fits in either category." Now, the reason I want to talk about the Colts is because I actually disagree here. Just last year, we saw the Colts sign Justin Houston. That's a pass rusher who was, at the time of signing, I believe 30 years old. Not to mention, he was also about 4 years removed from his 22-sack season, and he never even came close to that again. So, while I understand that GMs, they want to stay young and maybe not necessarily want to sign a bunch of old guys, Chris Ballard has done it fairly recently, and there's a need at the QB position there, just like there was a need at pass rusher for them. Never mind the fact that Justin Houston had actually sort of a bounce-back season from last season where he was injured a lot and didn't produce as well as he did on the Indianapolis Colts. So this one I don't really agree with. And even though, Ballard might have this philosophy about signing young players, guys with potential, I think he might make an exception for a quarterback that people argue is the greatest of all time. And also, there's a lot of star power. There's good storybook stuff that comes from signing Tom Brady. He'd come to Indianapolis and play in the same stadium as Peyton Manning, who was basically his arch nemesis. Number 12 is going to be in a jersey again, after Andrew Luck just retired. So there's a lot of storybook stuff that could go behind this, and I'm not necessarily sure that just the GM's philosophy on getting young guys and guys with a lot of potential would stop them from getting Tom Brady. Not to mention they have upwards of $85 million in cap space. So this one I don't necessarily agree with. So I would say to keep your eyes on the Indianapolis Colts still. The other two make a lot more sense as past candidates, but the Indianapolis Colts, I believe, definitely still have a chance. But those are, to me, the three most important teams likely to pass on Brady. And we're going to take a short break, and when we get back, we're going to talk the most important teams who are likely to give him an offer. So stay tuned.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. We were just talking Tom Brady and a few teams that are actually likely to pass on him. So now I want to talk about the teams that I feel are most important that are likely to give Brady an offer. Now, the ESPN analysts start their list with the New England Patriots. And the offer they provide here is actually very interesting. They say the New England Patriots should offer Tom Brady 5 years and $125 million. Now, of course, everyone's like, 5 years? It doesn't really make sense. He's 42 years old. There's no way he plays the full contract out. Now, the premise behind that is that Tom Brady's going to be getting $50 million in 2 years. Also, the guaranteed money for this contract they propose to only be around $37 million. Now, the reason why they say this is that, while it's more than what the Patriots are probably wanting to pay Tom Brady, it's much, much less than he's going to command anywhere else, and it still leaves a lot of cap space for them to pursue, tight ends, wide receivers, and other skill positions that they desperately need. Now, we all know that the Patriots are going to be aggressive in seeking these sort of skill players, whether or not Brady stays, so it's almost in his best interest to try and stay if he knows that they're going to do this. This makes sense. He's been in this system for 20 years? He knows it like the back of his hand. Why try and go learn something completely different, completely new, something that you might not like, something that's probably doesn't fit your style as much, and maybe the team struggles that you go to. Maybe the coach is so obsessed with trying to make a new system to fit you that other players suffer because they've been in a certain system for so long. So this is definitely very interesting, and they bring up the fact that Brady has a lot of leverage now, and that might be what is able to fish him some more money. I don't necessarily, think that this is the right thing to do. I'm not quite sure that this is what will happen, and even though they bring up a lot of good points, I don't necessarily agree. I think this was a situation in which, Belichick and Robert Kraft were, Tom Brady, we want you back. We want to sign you. I know we have some cap considerations, though. Maybe the money's not right. It'd be very different. However, Belichick is seemingly, as he is with everything, a stone wall. He hasn't vocally shown his support for Tom Brady. The phone call they had was rumored to not have gone very well. And it just doesn't seem like Belichick really cares whether Brady stays or not. So that, to me, is enough reason to leave. Now, of course, I'm not a professional football player, and I can't tell you what's going on in Tom Brady's mind and whether, he really, really, really doesn't want to leave. But right now, a change of scenery might be what's best. It might be worth it to go prove to Belichick, hey, you needed me and you made a mistake not asking me to stay or not, at least supporting me more, being more affectionate in the sense to try and get me to stay here and, take this team to yet another Super Bowl. Now, the team that I would like to see Brady go to, even though they're in, my favorite team's division, also is on this list as a team likely to make him an offer. The Los Angeles Chargers. So, the analysts bring up that the Chargers could offer Tom Brady a 2-year contract, which would satisfy his desire to play until he's 45, for $64 million fully guaranteed. So it's something like the Kirk Cousins deal that he had with the Minnesota Vikings. Of course, it's not a little, but it's less money. But it follows that precedent. The Chargers, they have enough cap space to do this, but it would put them in very, very much in a win now mode. They would have to win within the next 2 years because they have Joey Bosa coming up with, he's going to fetch a ton of money. Hunter Henry needs a contract as well. So if they make this move, they're going to have to be ready to win the Super Bowl within the next 2 years. Now, the reason why I like this is because I believe that they can become Super Bowl contenders if they pick up Tom Brady. They just signed Austin Eckler to a contract extension, and we know that he was arguably the best pass-catching running back in the NFL last year. With the weapons that they have, Tom Brady could pick apart defenses, but if they pick up Tom Brady, it's drastically going to change, the course of their franchise a bit here. A lot of people are projecting that the Chargers are going to draft a quarterback, but if they pick up Tom Brady, they're probably going to have to draft an offensive lineman at the top of the first round. I'm not sure if the Chargers want to do that, but if they're desperate for a Super Bowl win, if they're desperate for fans, because we all know that they struggle with their attendance numbers, this could be perfect. This might end up being more of a business move rather than a smart, move for the franchise moving forward and for their future. Teams can deal with a rebuild if there's short-term success at least. I can't imagine how hard it's been being a Browns or Bills fan, constantly losing, constantly being bad. So if they make this move and they keep their guys for this year, and if they sign Tom Brady, they have to give Hunter Henry, an extension because Tom Brady's going to want a tight end. He hasn't had one, because Gronkowski retired, and I think you're going to want to give him any possible weapon that you can. You're going to want to shore up the offensive line, and you're going to want to make sure that he's comfortable and he feels safe coming to play for your team, and then the rest is just natural. He's going to light it up. Not to mention, the Chargers are in California, and his family already has a house out there. It's even more convenient. So it's a lot of it's sort of like the Raiders in a sense, where you get that storybook side of it. They're going to a new stadium. They're going to have this new, GOAT quarterback, and look at all of our offensive weapons. The defense is no slouch at all. So this definitely could be the right move if Brady wants to win, because right now I feel like he could go to the Chargers without them adding many pieces, if any at all, and they could be Super Bowl contenders. So to me, I'm glad that, analysts see it this way as well, and I believe that the Chargers are the right spot for him. They give, they're fully guaranteeing their contract as opposed to, guaranteeing only the $50 million that the Patriots could offer. Of course, this is all hypothetical, but they can offer him more money. They're probably going to want to offer him more money, so this all just makes perfect sense. It's in LA. It's the city of stars, so really glad to see this on here. Now, another team they have on here, which is one I don't necessarily agree with, is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. To me, it wouldn't make sense for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to offer Tom Brady a massive contract if you have don't get me wrong here. Jameis Winston is, of course, a turnover machine. However, there was no point in the season when he's throwing, when he got to 20 interceptions. Why wasn't he benched? Why wasn't he traded? Why wasn't he cut? They have to believe in him to some capacity that after 30 interceptions, his starting position was never in question. And of course that might be because the backup probably wouldn't have done much better, but you got to believe that with him getting LASIK eye surgery and, they haven't traded him yet, that they're probably going to franchise tag him or give him an extension. I don't see the sense in bringing Brady to Tampa Bay because, to be quite honest, I'm not sure that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers give Brady the best chance to win. Yes, they have an amazing wide receiver duo, but do they have the elite line? Can they shore up the line? Is that what they want to do? They also don't really have recently. They haven't been to the playoffs in how long? At least the Chargers are not that far removed from a 12-4 season. They've got a great coach, and it just makes much more sense. I'm not really sure if Brady wants to go take on the challenge of flipping a franchise around in only 2 years. Now, the next and last team that they have here is the Tennessee Titans, which I really, really like. The Tennessee Titans have a ton of cap space, and they can offer him 4 years, $112 million. And with the leftover cap space, which is going to be probably $55 million after that deal, they can re-sign Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry alone is a weapon enough for Tom Brady to be attracted to Tennessee. If teams are going to be stacking the box and they're going to be so scared of him running that play action is basically a 90% successful play, this makes a ton of sense. The Tennessee Titans just got off of an AFC championship run, a run that nobody expected them to go on because they had to beat Tom Brady and the Patriots. He's seen what they can do, and they had to beat the Baltimore Ravens, everyone's Super Bowl favorite, basically. They also have A.J. Brown and Jonnu Smith, who are no slouches in pass catching, and Adam Humphries has been pretty good. The Patriots wanted him last year, so this could all be very appealing to Brady. Also, not to mention the coach used to be Brady's teammate. So Tennessee is a very attractive spot, and let's not forget, Brady has had an easy division his whole career. Is the AFC South that much more difficult when you take away the Texans? I'm not really sure. So I love these three teams that they have here offering Brady contracts. I think my favorite is still the Chargers. If I had to go a second favorite, it'd be the Patriots, and third, but not by much, the Tennessee Titans. I don't think the Buccaneers are actually factors here, but keep an eye, guys, on the Titans, the Chargers, and the Patriots. So, the roller coaster is still going to keep going. We're still not going to know until free agency opens up. So I don't know what's going to happen, but yes, keep your eyes on these three teams, and let's see what happens. So definitely some exciting stuff, guys. We're going to take a quick break here, but stay tuned, because when we get back, we're going to be talking free agency fantasy wish list. We're going to be talking, PPR half, should you be playing standard, and some other more interesting stuff. So stick around, and we'll be right back.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. All right, guys, we just got done talking Tom Brady. You know how big of a situation that is right now. Everyone's got their eye on that. But right now, I want to switch gears and talk about some other free agents and how they apply to my fantasy football wish list. So basically what we're going to do is, look at some key free agents, notable guys, and where I hope they go so that my fantasy football season can thrive and yours can too. So I want to start this list off talking about quarterbacks. You guys already know the spiel. Quarterback is the most important position on the field. Now, I want to start with Jameis Winston. Now, regardless of what you think of him as a quarterback, as a leader, as an accurate thrower of the football, we're talking fantasy here, and all we're worried about is points. Jameis Winston threw 33 touchdowns, over 5,000 yards, and 30 interceptions. Now, even though he threw 30 interceptions and had plenty more fumbles, the man finished as a top 5 fantasy quarterback. Just think about that. If you take away even just 10, 15 of those interceptions, he'd be probably above some other guys. So, my wish for Jameis Winston as a free agent is that he stays with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And here's why. I'm not really sure another team's going to want him. It feels like the only team that's going to tolerate him, or at least even keep him as a starting quarterback, is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's comfortable there, and, he has a rapport with Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, and as we can see, he has the ability to produce, and to produce at a high level. Hopefully the LASIK eye surgery does wonders, and that was mostly to blame for his interceptions. And then we'll see him thrive, and he will again be a top 5 fantasy quarterback. You can book it now. With 30 interceptions, if you can be a top 5 fantasy quarterback, he can produce much less, maybe 4,000 yards, 28 touchdowns, and still be a top 5 fantasy quarterback, guys. So he can regress and still finish the same place he finished last year. So you guys should want him to stay on the Buccaneers. I do. That's going to be the best bet for him, because if he goes somewhere else, I do not believe he's going to be the starter. The teams that have several needs at quarterback are probably looking at someone like Phillip Rivers right now, or they're going to draft one in the upcoming draft. It doesn't make sense for them to pick up a guy who just threw 30 interceptions and he's wishy-washy, not that consistent. So Jameis Winston should stay a Tampa Bay Buccaneer, and you should definitely draft him as if he's going to finish as a top 5 fantasy quarterback. Next on the list, Phillip Rivers. For me, I hope Phillip Rivers goes to the Indianapolis Colts. Yes, I do hope Tom Brady goes there as well, but if he doesn't, I hope that Phillip Rivers goes to the Colts. He's been linked to them for a while now. He's there. The Colts are one of his potential landing spots, and it's definitely going to be good for his fantasy value. Even though Phillip Rivers hasn't been, a QB1 material, he's definitely been QB2, upper QB2 tier. And if you give him T.Y. Hilton and Jack Doyle, he's going to succeed. Not to mention, they have Marlon Mack and Nyheim Hines. Nyheim Hines is a good pass-catching running back, and Marlon Mack, opens up the run game. This serves well for a quarterback who's going to be using play action. Phillip Rivers is going to need that. He's not the most mobile guy, so look for them to use play action, take the shots down the field, increase his production. But honestly, the reason I want Phillip Rivers to go here is because it'll increase the value of people like I said, T.Y. Hilton and Jack Doyle. I think Phillip Rivers' move to the Colts serves better for them rather than Phillip Rivers. I don't think he's going to shoot up into, elite status or QB1. I think he'll go back to that upper tier QB2. But I think you can, T.Y. Hilton and Jack Doyle are going to get significant boosts in their fantasy value. So for Phillip Rivers, I would love to see him in an Indianapolis Colts uniform and finally out of my division. All right. For Ryan Tannehill, I think the best bet for him is where he is right now. I think he should stay a Tennessee Titan. Guys, I want to give you this little stat nugget. So in the 10 games that Ryan Tannehill started, only Lamar Jackson and surprisingly Ryan Fitzpatrick scored more fantasy points among quarterbacks. Yeah, so think about that for a second. Even though Ryan Tannehill's not the biggest name, and in the playoffs, he wasn't passing as much as someone who would score that much fantasy points, he was a great fantasy quarterback. So you guys should want him to stay here. If he goes somewhere else, I'm really not sure he's going to thrive, and I feel like it's just going to be a repeat of when he was on the Dolphins. He's getting much better, and I think he's perfect for the Titans system where they're just pounding the rock, and he can hit you over the top with a play-action bomb. They got a lot of great young receivers. They've been producing a lot everywhere in terms of fantasy, so I really think that him, A.J. Brown, and Derrick Henry, them staying together is going to be perfect for fantasy. So I want Ryan Tannehill to stay with the Titans, and you guys should too, because I don't think he'll produce as well anywhere else. Now, the last quarterback, of course I have to mention him, Tom Brady. And I've mentioned this before, you guys already know, so I'll just touch on it quick. He should go in the Chargers. I think if he goes to the Chargers, that's going to be the biggest boost in his fantasy value because as of right now, the Patriots haven't secured any other weapons. The Chargers already have them, and those weapons are pretty darn good. Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Austin Eckler. I mean, are you kidding? Austin Eckler's not going to share any snaps with Melvin Gordon now, so that's going to catapult him into a top five running back. So you guys should definitely want Tom Brady on the Chargers for fantasy sake. I don't know, what's your favorite football team? If you don't want him in your division, don't want to play against him, but for fantasy football, Tom Brady's best bet is going with the Los Angeles Chargers. All right, guys, and now I want to look at some notable free agent running backs. I've already spoken about Melvin Gordon, so I'll skip him for now. I want to start off with Kenyon Drake. I think Kenyon Drake, I want him to stay as a Cardinal. As soon as he got traded there, a lot of people didn't expect much. David Johnson, he really disappointed. And Kenyon Drake filled that void tremendously. They're not going to release David Johnson, but maybe he'll be traded. And if the Cardinals trade Johnson and they keep Drake as the number one guy, he definitely is going to thrive. I think the Cardinals are only going to get better from here. They're a very young team. Kyler Murray has a lot of promise. I think Kenyon Drake is going to put up a lot of fantasy points as an Arizona Cardinal. Look for him to be an RB2. The next running back I want to look at is Jordan Howard. Now, we really didn't get to see much of Jordan Howard because he dealt with injuries with the Eagles. But as Miles Sanders has, sort of made his way into the top dog role, I don't think Jordan Howard stays here. But where I would like to see him if he leaves, the Houston Texans. Now, Carlos Hyde rushed for over 1,000 yards last year as a Houston Texan. Jordan Howard can do just that and more. Jordan Howard has a lot of power. He's a good goal line guy. And, even though Duke Johnson is there, I think that Jordan Howard could become basically Carlos Hyde, but better. He could definitely rush for over 1,000 yards. This is going to give him a huge bump in value. I don't think he's going to be sharing time as much as he did when he was on the Eagles. He's definitely a bounce-back candidate. He's a young guy. He's got a lot of potential. So I think, if the Texans do not re-sign Carlos Hyde, I think I would love to see Jordan Howard in a Texans uniform. He's a similar runner to Carlos Hyde, but he's younger, and I think he could produce just as well, if not better, than Carlos Hyde. So definitely not a top 10 sort of running back, but he can definitely produce for you guys. Now, I will circle back to Melvin Gordon because he's very interesting. Melvin Gordon has the potential to be a top 10 running back, maybe even top 7, top 5. And this is because he's great at pass catching. Now, a lot of people are linking him to the Dolphins, but I'm not sure about that. Honestly, I know I also said I would like Jordan Howard to go to the Texans, but to me, for Gordon, it'd be between the Buccaneers and the Texans. Could you imagine Melvin Gordon, DeAndre Hopkins, and Deshaun Watson on a team together? It's going to be one of those dynamite offenses similar to the Kansas City Chiefs. Of course, not as fast or quick strike, but anyone can eat on any play. Not to mention Melvin Gordon is kind of like Carlos Hyde and Duke Johnson all in one. I think he could take the workhorse role. He won't have to share as many carries with Duke Johnson and, put up a ton of numbers. Of course, like I said, Melvin Gordon has been linked to the Dolphins, but I'd much rather see him in a potent offense now rather than a rebuilding one who's not sure who their quarterback's going to be. And if it is, it's going to be a rookie, so untested. the other team that I would like to see Melvin Gordon on if he doesn't end up with the Texans is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The reason being, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have no run game. I mentioned that in last week's show, and if he goes there, you can look for them to open up the field, maybe have people stack boxes, play off of play action way more because people are actually going to be scared of the running back. And Jameis Winston's going to be able to dump off to a pass-catching back who's going to pick up yards, touchdowns, and that's going to limit turnovers because they're easy little checkdowns that they can turn into big plays. So that's it for the running back, guys. I want to get into the wide receivers, but first we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back talking about notable free agent wide receivers and where I hope for them to land for fantasy football's sake. All right, so stay tuned. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. All right, we just got done talking my fantasy football wish list for free agent quarterbacks, and now, guys, we're going to move on to the pass catchers. All right, so let's get right into this. For the first wide receiver, Amari Cooper. Now, even though I'm a Cowboy hater, I'll admit it, I think the best chance for Amari Cooper to produce for fantasy football is to stay a Cowboy. Now, if we look at this last year, even though Amari Cooper was terrible on the road, Amari Cooper finished as fantasy's number 7 wide receiver. Now, of course, that's attributed to Dak Prescott having a phenomenal fantasy year, but who's to say he can't repeat that and get even better? I think, they're definitely going to do some things to fix that issue of being, just home warriors and, him being crappy on the road. So he could possibly finish as a top 5 fantasy wide receiver should the offense stay just as productive. They have the same offensive coordinator, and if they just get their things together. So for Amari Cooper, I want him to stay a Dallas Cowboy. He's going to put up great numbers there. He's an excellent route runner. They just need to fix a few things and keep his head in the game, and needs to fix things mentally, and he can finish as a top 5 fantasy wide receiver. So keep him at that value, guys. Top 10 wide receiver. AJ Green, it's already been speculated he's going to be franchise tagged by the Bengals, but honestly, I would rather him be a Patriot. He's been linked to them, and I feel like if Tom Brady's going to stay, to give him that kind of weapon, this is all, we're saying that AJ Green bounces back from injury and comes back and returns to form, or just, slightly worse. AJ Green and Tom Brady together, that's going to be awesome for the both of them. So I think for AJ Green, while Joe Burrow's looking amazing, and of course a lot of people are expecting him to turn the franchise around, I'm not sure how much I love AJ Green on the team with Joe Burrow when, there's rising stars like Tyler Boyd on that team. Auden Tate's pretty good as well. I think Tyler Boyd's going to assume more of that wide receiver 1 role as AJ Green's missed a ton of time. So I think I'd rather see AJ Green be a Patriot, but as of right now, it looks like he's going to be a Bengal, guys. Next, Robbie Anderson. Now, Robbie Anderson can flat out fly, but it's likely that he's not going to stay a New York Jet. So one team that I would love to see him on, that's, that needs a secondary receiver, the Green Bay Packers. Now, Aaron Rodgers basically only has Devontae Adams, and they need a deep threat. They need someone who can get on the outside and take the top off of a defense, and that's going to help everyone else. If Aaron Rodgers has a deep threat guy that he can consistently throw bombs to, of course it's going to help his value and Robbie Anderson's. If Robbie Anderson can succeed with Sam Darnold, I mean, come on, guys. He can succeed with Aaron Rodgers and the Packers. That's also going to boost the value of other guys like Devontae Adams and even Aaron Jones. They don't have to. Defenses can't solely focus on them as much, and he's going to attract attention from those safeties that are going to be playing deep. So, again, like I said, I know it's repetitive, but he's going to help everyone else out. So this is good not only for Robbie Anderson, but for the Packers as a whole for fantasy value. All right, now I want to move on to some other, pass catchers. Austin Hooper. Now, honestly, the best place for Austin Hooper that I think would also be the Patriots. The Patriots, we've seen what they do with great tight ends. They're absolutely phenomenal. They score a ton of fantasy points, but this is going to rely on the fact of Tom Brady staying. If Tom Brady doesn't stay, I'd rather see Austin Hooper go somewhere like the Packers, a team that is in desperate need of a tight end and has a great quarterback. I know a lot of people have linked Austin Hooper to the Bears, but I'm sorry, I just don't trust Mitchell Trubisky, and I think that's going to hurt Austin Hooper's fantasy value rather than boost Mitchell Trubisky's fantasy value and Austin's. So I'm hoping Austin Hooper can go somewhere like the Packers or the Patriots. And, honestly, best case scenario, the Falcons retain him. He did absolutely phenomenal on the Falcons this year. Excuse me. And we all know that with that great pass catcher, Matt Ryan, Calvin Ridley, Julio Jones, and him, the fantasy value is through the roof. So Austin Hooper, would love for him to stay a Falcon. But if he goes to the Patriots or the Packers, that's great too. Now for the last one here, Eric Ebron. Honestly, I would have rather Eric Ebron stayed a Colt over Jack Doyle. But for some reason, they've already hinted at letting him go. And so, honestly, Eric Ebron, he can basically go to any tight end needy team. Someone like the Packers. Someone like maybe, I wouldn't say the Bills because they got Dawson Knox. I would say maybe the Redskins. The Redskins would probably be the best place for Eric Ebron to go, as they just let go of Jordan Reed and Vernon Davis just retired. Now, I know there's concerns about Dwayne Haskins. He hasn't really performed well, but I do expect him to get better. And honestly, even if he doesn't get that much better, Eric Ebron's going to be the number one option at tight end. He'll basically be the only tight end they have. So expect him to put up a lot of fantasy points, and he's going to be a goal line target that Dwayne Haskins can trust. He's going to need a big guy. It's going to make the throws easier, and he's going to be able to get that jump ball and box a defender out. So for Eric Ebron, I'd like to see him be a Washington Redskin. And honestly, if you're a tight end on a team and you're the tight end one and you're not really sharing snaps with another tight end, that's big for fantasy football. We know that there really aren't, outside of like top 5 guys in football for tight end, that are going to produce a bunch of numbers in fantasy football. Eric Ebron, a lot of people had hopes for him. So those hopes that you had for him as a Colt, even though he was sharing snaps, keep those same hopes for him if he moves to a team where he can be the tight end one. He's going to have the potential to put up huge numbers like he did for the Indianapolis Colts just a few years ago when Jack Doyle was constantly injured. That year, he finished as fantasy's number 4 tight end. That's elite potential, guys, so definitely keep an eye on where he goes. Now, guys, we won't know for sure where these guys are going until free agency opens up in just about a week from today. But look for these guys to end up on these teams. Of course, this is not saying these guys are going to shoot up and finish number 1 in their position. But any of these guys going to any of these teams, it's almost certain that their fantasy value is going to boost. And if not, it at least is going to boost the fantasy value of the other members of the team. So, with that, we're going to take a short break. But stay tuned, guys, because we're going to be talking if you guys should be playing PPR, PPR half, standard scoring, and what all of that means. So, we're going to talk that and maybe some XFL. Stay tuned. We'll be back.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? we've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Okay, we just got done talking about my fantasy football free agent wish list. We talked quarterbacks, running backs, and pass catchers. And now we're going to move on to something fantasy related, but something a little more for people who may not be fantasy football veterans or people who are looking to start leagues, looking to start playing. So I want to talk about the scoring systems for when you're starting a league or joining a league. The three are PPR, PPR half, and standard. Now, in my opinion, there really isn't a right or wrong scoring system to use. So I want to kind of go through each one and detail the pros and the cons of each, and then you guys can make your own decision on whether you want to use, PPR, PPR half, or standard scoring. I'll let you know what I prefer, let you know what I use when starting my leagues or what I prefer when joining a league, but let's just get into it. So we'll start with the one that seems to be more popular nowadays, which is PPR. Essentially, if you don't know, PPR stands for points per reception. And basically what that means is it's standard scoring, except there's 1 point for every time a wide receiver, a running back, or a tight end catches a ball. Basically, any player that catches a ball gets a point. Now, the only reason I don't like PPR is because it makes wide receivers and receiving backs really, really basically overpowered. The only problem is, or I guess I should say the biggest problem is that guys like Derrick Henry don't get as much love, and they're not going to score nearly as many points as guys like Saquon, Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara. So another gripe that I have with PPR is that you can score points on negative plays. Now, or let's say you'll score points on negative plays more often than something like half PPR. So technically, a wide receiver can catch a screen and lose 5 yards, and the fantasy owner will still get half a point. To me, that just doesn't seem right. Someone could technically lose a game by half a point on the final play of a game being a botched screen pass that goes backwards for 5 yards. To me, that doesn't really make any sense. Also, I'm not saying that catching a ball in the NFL is easy by any means, but catching, a check down, a little screen pass is very, very easy, and fantasy managers just get basically free points off of that. And to me, it's just a little overpowered. And during the draft, if you're not one of those top early picks and you're not getting a pass-catching running back, it's not that you're doomed, but it's just much more difficult for you when you have someone like, let's say, Nick Chubb, as opposed to someone like Christian McCaffrey, who gets a lot of both. He's rushing the ball a lot, and he's catching the ball a ton. Now, this is not to say that Nick Chubb is a scrub by any means. He's a phenomenal running back. But in terms of fantasy, if you're missing out on a whole half of, strategy and the points to gain, then it doesn't really make sense to draft him early. But if you get stuck with him, other guys are just going to benefit just because their running backs are just involved in the pass game. They don't even have to get a ton of yards. They just have to get, 5 catches. That's an extra 5 points per game. It takes a running back that gets 10 points per game and bumps him up to 15, which is a pretty large margin. So that's my gripe with PPR. Standard scoring. Now, standard scoring is interesting to me because it creates a more level playing field. Now, you're 100% going to get way lower scoring games, but running backs are on a much more even playing field, making the draft strategy very interesting. Now, at this point, you don't need to just get pass-catching running backs. At this point, you just need to get elite running backs in general. there's not as much importance on the wide receiver position because, they're not getting points per catch. So they're just getting points for yards. You're going to want guys that get a bunch of touchdowns rather than the guys that just get a bunch of targets and catches per game. So it's very interesting. The only problem with that is, again, the running back position becomes, do or die. If you do not get 2 solid running backs, you're kind of left in the dust because the wide receivers aren't going to make up for those lost points because they're not getting points per catch. So that's interesting as well, but to me, it provides much more of a challenge and much more of a level playing field between fantasy managers. So that could be more interesting for you as well. A lot of the people say, though, the biggest argument against it is that it's so touchdown reliant. If you don't have a running back, who's taking the goal line touches, or, you're on a team where they spread the ball out a lot, standard scoring could be bad for you. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, I want to move on to my personal favorite of the three, is half PPR. Half PPR to me is sort of like a perfect middle ground. Instead of getting a full point every time a player catches the ball, you get half a point. So there's much more potential to, get that 0 points on a bad play, and half a point really doesn't seem as much. When you add them all up, half a point is much better than getting a full point. So that means it's only 5 points for 10 catches rather than 10. That it means a guy with 10 catches and 100 yards in PPR is going to get 20 points, but in half PPR he'll only get 15. So it's just to me it's a little more balanced. But again, it's still going to make those pass-catching running backs and the pass catchers in general way stronger, way more valuable than guys like Nick Chubb, Derrick Henry, even a little bit of Zeke that doesn't get involved in the pass game as much as some other guys like Kamara, Christian McCaffrey, things like that. So it's all very interesting stuff. Now, guys, there's no wrong answer. It all depends on what kind of league you're using, and there's so many different types of leagues you can make. You can make your own custom scoring, but you just have to make sure it's right for the type of league that you want to run. It all depends on, 12-man, 10-man, 8-man league. Every league is different. So, like I said, PPR, ton of points. Standard, lower points, but more level playing field in my opinion. PPR half, to me, is kind of like the perfect balance. So it's up to you guys. You decide whether or not you want to use a certain one. But now I want to go through some draft strategies. If you're playing PPR, you have to get either a pass-catching running back or an elite receiver. There is no settling. There is no, okay, I'll just draft this. No, if you're not getting a pass-catching running back with one of the earlier picks, the Saquons and McCaffreys, you have to get someone like Julio. You have to get someone like Devontae Adams, who's going to get a ton of targets on their team. For PPR half, it's basically the same, guys. You got to get, if you're not in those top 5 picks, getting those elite pass-catching running backs, get an elite receiver. It's almost mandatory. Now, in standard scoring, you're going to see a lot more running backs go off the board in that first round. So you're going to have to draft a little bit differently. You're going to have to probably aim for getting 2 running backs first instead of maybe splitting a running back and a receiver as you would in a PPR or a half PPR. In a PPR and a half PPR as well, you can throw in, that sort of wild card tight end pick in the first round. If you're late in the first round, if you get someone like George Kittle or Travis Kelce, that could shake things up a lot as well, and that could really help your team down the stretch. If you're doing standard scoring, though, it just seems like it's just one of those things you just got to get a running back. So there's pros and cons to each. There's certain draft strategies for each. But again, like I said, everyone's going to prefer a certain scoring system, a certain rules to their league, certain, scoring numbers. There's some people that do 2 points per catch. People do bonuses for every 80 yards, every 100-yard game. So again, guys, it's all up to you. I just wanted to provide some insight on how these things work. If you've never started a league and you're thinking about starting one, if you've never been in one but are interested in joining one, these are definitely things to consider because people are going to be scoring way more points with certain formats and way less points in others. So with that, guys, we're going to go into our final break of the day, and when we get back, we're going to be talking XFL. So stay tuned, hope you enjoy, and we'll wrap up the show right after that.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. All right, guys, for our last segment, I actually want to switch gears a little bit, and I want to talk about football, but not necessarily the NFL. The XFL. Now, a lot of people have been talking about the XFL in recent weeks, and it's been more popular than I expected, honestly. But I want to talk about their numbers and if they can actually last. So, they just wrapped up week 5, and I want to talk about their viewership over the first 4 weeks. Now, unfortunately, the XFL has seen a steady decline every week after week 1. So, week 1 had 12,472,000 viewers, and I think everyone expected that number to dip into week 2. Okay. Week 2 had 8,226,000, but then week 3 lost another 2 million, 6,442,000, and then week 4 lost another million, 5,503,000 viewers over all of their games. So that's pretty concerning. You know, we haven't seen the ratings for week 5 yet, but a steady decline is never good. Now, we do have to dig deeper into those numbers. So, if we look at the XFL's Saturday network ratings from February 29th, if we look at the XFL on Fox had 1.8 million views, the XFL on ABC had 1.5 million views. Now, if we compare that to the NBA on ABC, the NBA only had 2.3 million views, which isn't that much more than the XFL on Fox at 1.8. Interestingly enough, the XFL on Fox had more viewers than PGA on NBC, NCAA, MLS, and the NFL Combine. Now, I know not everyone is rushing to go see the Combine, but a ton of people love to watch the Combine, and it's also an NFL broadcast. So the XFL is also competing with that Combine and still only had 500,000 less viewers than the NBA. So at the end of the day, even though these numbers are steadily decreasing, which is a cause for concern, it's not as bad as some may think. And compared to the AAF at this point in time, the XFL is doing outstanding. If you look at the lowest number for the XFL and the highest number for the AAF in their 4th week, the XFL almost doubles viewership of the AAF. Now, of course, this is for various reasons, but I think the reason that everyone thinks the XFL is sort of, or a lot of people think the XFL is sort of bound to fail because of the love for the NFL. And this is why I think starting a new league is sort of complex. I like the idea of the AFL, and I love that they want to bring football to us in the springtime when there is no NFL. However, I question just how successful another league can be, and this has a lot to do with the quality of players. You know, all of the best players are going to be in the NFL. So it's hard to get tied into an XFL game where you know these aren't the best players in the world. They're not even the best players in the country. Now, what made me a little more intrigued about the XFL was the recent news that came out that the Seattle Seahawks were going to scout PJ Tucker. Now, I've always said, you know, that the NFL needs a development league. And, you know, the NBA does it with their G League, and it's very successful. And, excuse me, we've seen guys come up from the G League and contribute on NBA teams. Now, from my understanding, Vince McMahon is trying to make a competitor. He's not trying to make a developmental league. But if the XFL continues to see this steady decline, and honestly, it's going to get quite scary when March Madness rolls around and, NBA teams are going to start fighting for playoff spots and viewership is going to decrease a ton, I believe. I don't want to see another league fail. I think it'd be in the best interest for one of these leagues to maybe partner up with the NFL. I understand, these guys are creating a business. These guys are trying to make money while also providing a good product. But I don't think that the NFL is ever going to be toppled, and I'm not even sure that the NFL can ever even have true, serious competition. I mean, we have to understand the NFL has been around for generations. It's been instilled in families. It's been instilled sort of like bloodlines, the way, fanship runs through families. So it's so hard. It's going to be very, very hard to pry that sort of passion or even have people share the passion that they have for the NFL for the XFL. Because at the end of the day, that's the goal for XFL owners and Vince McMahon and the Commissioner Luck. They're not, who's going to say, oh, we're just trying to be, another football thing that some people want to watch and only diehard. No, they want, the sky's the limit. You know what I mean? And there is a desire for this because there was a study done where about 40 million Americans said that they wanted more football after the NFL was over. So there is potential for this, but my concern is those 40 million people aren't tuning in on the weekends to watch the XFL. So it is something very interesting to look at. The XFL has promise, but the only way that they stay alive is if their viewership levels out this way. If we look at, their viewership on FS1 and ESPN2, which are sort of like secondary channels, it's not like ESPN or Fox or ABC where everyone can tune into. On FS1, they got 1.113 million views, and on ESPN2, 1.3 million. If they don't ever dip below 1 million, the XFL has a good chance to stay around for a long, long time. And I forgot to mention, there was a college basketball on game that same weekend that was only fetching around 700,000 views. And we all know how important college sports are to Americans. So it's all very interesting. If the XFL, I understand they're seeing a steady decline. But if this is their lowest point and they can sort of level out at around 1 million views per game, then they can stick around. That's going to be, if 1.8 million views per game, 1.5, that's better than some MLB games, some NBA games, and they can stick around for a while. But it all depends, and we just don't know. There's no answer. There's no perfect answer. There's no yes, no. It's all in the air for now. But in my opinion, if the viewership continues to decrease, I think the XFL or someone should just take an opportunity to create a development league for the NFL. I think it could serve players really well. And, there's been a ton of problems with, people worrying about not getting paid in college football and how corrupt the system is and all of that. And I think the XFL and the whole, situation with PJ Tucker could lay groundwork for a future relationship between the XFL and the NFL in which they work together. The XFL is in a different season. The NFL can really benefit from that. A lot of these players can, go to the XFL, develop and show the world their skills, and then the NFL can scout great players and get some from there without having just draft rookies from college. You're going to get guys with real professional football playing experience, and I understand the level of competition is not going to be the same as the NFL, but if PJ Tucker ends up on an NFL team, it could lay some cool groundwork for a relationship between the two leagues and some awesome things. With that being said, I just want to make it clear, I'm not hoping that the XFL fails at all. I'm just saying, I didn't want the AAF to fail as well, and we all saw how that turned out. They literally just ran out of money. So if something bad like that does happen, I'm hoping that out of this, a developmental league for the NFL can be created, and maybe the NFL can prevent the XFL from failing in that regard, where there's a partnership created, and maybe they can send, practice squad players to go play XFL games. It can all get really, really interesting. So we'll see what happens. I'm hoping the XFL continues to stay successful. I know they've seen that, like I said, the viewership decline, but it's nothing too alarming. Again, my biggest concern is just, March Madness is a huge event in the States, so we'll see what happens. Hopefully they can stay afloat. and keep providing football for people, after the NFL season's over. And with that, guys, I want to thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Guys, again, I'm going to ask that you subscribe and please write a nice review, because that really helps us know what we're doing wrong and what we can improve on. The goal is to always give you guys a great show, and if you guys aren't enjoying it, then we want to change it. Also, please remember to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And as always, guys, thank you and have a great night. We'll see you next week.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.